to week 10's lectures on Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of Baskervilles. In today's session, I'll be discussing the Gothic plot of the novel. If you remember the previous lecture session, I was discussing the key Gothic element of the novel, the Hound. We were talking about the ghastly, haunting quality of the Hound of Baskervilles. Further described as a dreadful apparition and a hellhound, the hound has a thirst for blood and a desire to kill. Using science, Doyle is able to explain the seemingly supernatural qualities of the beast. When Holmes and Watson encounter the creature, the bluish flame dripping from its mouth that provided the spectral glow is declared as being a cunning preparation of phosphorus. The hound is also perceived or seen as a frightful spirit. It is spectral, it's ghostly. It is also called as the hellhound, the hound from hell. And this particular hound has a desire for blood. It's almost vampiric in some sense. It thirsts for blood and it wants to kill. Interestingly, we see at the end of the novel, Holmes is able to explain away the spectral, the spiritual, the supernatural elements of the beast. He explains that this creature, which has this bluish flame that seems to be coming from its mouth, is nothing but a cunning, a crafty preparation of phosphorus. So there is a chemical explanation for this apparently supernatural quality of the hound. You can see very clearly how science is able to explain away the Gothic character of the hound, and Holmes, the detective, is using his expertise to rationally explain the spiritual quality, the hellish nature of the hound. Reflecting the sentiments of Poe's Dupin, Holmes states, "The more outre and grotesque an incident is, the more carefully it deserves to be examined. And the very point which appears to complicate a case is, when duly considered and scientifically handled, the one which is most likely to elucidate it." This is very significant in a larger sense in relation to the Gothic character too. Holmes argues that the more extraordinary and bizarre a particular event is, then one should more carefully examine all aspects of that incident, and Holmes suggests that a thorough examination, a scientific exploration of that particular case, the incident, will shed clearer light on the matter. So one can see that the apparent mystery, the event which is shrouded in darkness and mystery, can be explained away in a logical and rational and scientific manner. Likewise, for the Gothic, sometimes the narrative, the story, the event or the incident might be spectral and spiritual and supernatural, but a thorough examination might explain the societal cause for this apparent supernatural phenomena. Gothic society was fearful of many intrusions, from disease and poverty to crime and degeneration. These fears, compounded by advances and inquiry in science, technology, and epistemology, were exploited by many Gothic writers, from The Walking Dead and lab-created monsters to madness and evil specters. Let me just pick up on the last mentioned elements which frequent Gothic fiction. Michelle Miranda points out that these monsters could be creatures from legends and myths, such as vampires, the Walking Dead. The Gothic creatures could be created from a laboratory. It could be a Hyde-like creature, Hyde from R.L. Stevenson's A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, for example, or Frankenstein's monster, which is experimentally produced by Victor Frankenstein. So the monsters could be taken from traditional narratives, or it could be the result of scientific experimentation. It could be evil specters or man-made, regardless of the way these creatures originated. What we understand is that the Gothic writers exploited these various monsters that come in many shapes and sizes in order to explore the fears in society. It's very interesting to see that Michelle Miranda calls the society itself as Gothic Society. The society which is so fearful, which is full of anxieties, is a Gothic society, and this society uses all these monsters to explore, somehow kind of chase away these monsters, exorcise these monsters by narratively experiment with them. So the fears of society are many. For instance, crime, the fear of degeneration, going backwards in time, losing civilizational attributes, the fear of disease, the fear of foreigners, and so on. So Gothic is a useful medium to think through the fears that haunt society. Successful authors found ways to make their fictional tales horrific by weaving in elements of moral panic and sociocultural beliefs to give their macabre tales an air of reality. Degeneration, criminological theories of atavism, and psychological theories of madness sparked fears that Poe and Doyle were able to capture in their stories. Writers such as Doyle and Edgar Allan Poe were able to exploit the deepest anxieties and fears of the individuals in society. They harnessed the moral panic, the fear about atavism, that is primitivism, that people feared, were slowly making intrusions into the civilizational fabric of society. New theories, new bodies of knowledge about how a criminal mind works also caused panic among people in society, because they were able to use these theories to analyze crimes and apply these theories and models onto different sections of the people in their society. So science also caused a lot of fear among society. So one can see how while advancement was happening in society, the very same domains of advancement also caused people to be very, very apprehensive about the trajectory of the human race. The Hound of the Baskervilles, one of the best known of Sherlock Holmes' novels, was written by Doyle in 1901. The novel was serialized in the Strand magazine and was published in book form in 1902. It was the first Sherlock Holmes tale since the detective's shocking death in the story The Final Problem, 1893, but was set prior to his demise. The popularity of The Hound of Baskervilles helped pave the way for Holmes's appearance in later works. You can see a very interesting position, interesting narrative life in relation to the character of Holmes. Holmes was apparently killed in the story The Final Problem, which was published, as I mentioned, in 1893. But as I pointed out in my previous lecture, there was an outcry for the revival of this character Holmes, and Doyle had to satisfy his reading public, and lo and behold, we had the Hound of Baskervilles. And interestingly, in the Hound of Baskervilles, Holmes makes an appearance, but this novel is set, prior to the quote-unquote death of Holmes. And once again, this work becomes immensely popular and makes the way for the continuation of this character Holmes. It kind of helps Holmes revive, come back to life on the pages of Doyle's writing. Now let's take a look at the plot of this novel. Based on a local legend of a spectral hound that haunted Dartmoor in Devonshire, England, the story is set in the moors at Baskerville Hall and the nearby Grimpen Mire, and the action takes place mostly at night, when the terrifying hound howls for blood. After Sir Charles Baskerville is found dead with his face twisted in stark terror, Holmes is called upon to protect his heir, Sir Henry Baskerville. Narrating the story is Holmes's assistant, Dr. Watson, who was sent to Dartmoor while the busy Holmes remains in London. So we have a clear-cut Gothic setting for this novel. The novel is set in the moors, on those empty vistas of space, where we have grasslands. That is the setting, and the story takes place mostly in the dark. The key house, the key mansion edifice is Baskerville Hall, and of course we have another Gothic setting in the Grimpen Mire. Even the names are symbolic and doesn't give a lot of cheer to the readers. There is this legend about this ghostly hound that is doing the rounds in the community, and at night one can hear the howls of the hound, which seems to be baying for blood. There is death at the beginning, and it is the death of Sir Charles Baskerville, and he seems to have died in great terror. And Holmes is roped in to help save the life of his heir, Sir Henry Baskerville, and the story is narrated by Holmes's friend and assistant, Dr. Watson. In fact, Holmes sends Dr. Watson to check out the place and its environment, while he apparently stays in London. Upon his arrival, Watson learns that an escaped convict is on the loose. More unsettling events occur, including the appearance of an unknown person or figure on the moor. Watson later discovers that the mysterious person is Holmes, who has been conducting his own investigation. Holmes deduces that the killer is Jack Stapleton, a neighbor who's actually Roger Baskerville. Hoping to inherit the family estate, he has plotted to kill his relatives using a vicious hound that he has painted with phosphorus to appear sinister. The superstitious Charles suffered a heart attack after being frightened by the animal. Stapleton also hopes to kill Henry Baskerville, but is thwarted by Holmes. Afterward, Stapleton flees and is believed to have died, swallowed by Grimpen Mire. You can see that this is a very dark narrative of crime, and there is a fantastic combination of science and human evil. Watson is doing a bit of investigation on his own, and he comes to know that there is an escaped convict on the loose in the surroundings. So, escaped convict, moors, Grumpenmeyer. So all these are classic Gothic attributes, and he also finds that is Watson also finds that there's somebody else on the moors as well, and he finally realizes that it is none other than Holmes himself, who is secretively conducting an investigation of his own. So you can see how very eerily Holmes puts himself into the crime plot. That Holmes finds out that it is the neighbor, Jack Stapleton, who is behind all these strange and eerie happenings. And we realize that Jack Stapleton is in fact related to the Baskervilles, and it is he who had exploited the Hound to scare Sir Charles Baskerville to his death. Jack Stapleton knew that Sir Charles was very superstitious, and the appearance of this hound, in reality, the Hound of the Legends, in reality, would seriously affect him, and he is proven right when Charles dies of heart attack, believing that he is seeing this ghostly, spectral hellhound. And Stapleton had planned to kill Henry as well, the heir to the property, but he is eventually thwarted by Holmes. And Stapleton, while he's fleeing, falls into Grumpenmeyer and is killed in a really ghastly, dreadful manner. And we are reminded of the Moonstone as well, where we have similar settings too. At this point, I want you to think back to the Shivering Sand and the Moonstone, and it would be interesting to draw connections between Rosanna Spearman, who kills herself by drowning in the Shivering Sand. So there is a parallel in terms of the Gothic settings, and we see how disturbing characters and problematic objects are disposed of with the help of Gothic locales. The Hound of Baskervilles is the third novel by Conan Doyle to feature Holmes, and is arguably the most famous detective story in fiction. The tale was a huge success upon its first appearance in the Strand magazine, where it ran from August 1901 to April 1902. Indeed, the story's popularity was such that for the first and only time in the Strand's history, a seventh printing of the magazine was required in order to keep up with demand. So you can see how very popular this tale was with the public. In fact, the seventh edition was something unheard of in the history of the magazine, The Strand. In The Hound of Baskervilles, Conan Doyle uncharacteristically emphasized the eerie setting and mysterious atmosphere rather than the hero's deductive ingenuity. One of the all-time classic mysteries, the novel was hugely popular as readers rejoiced at the return of Sherlock Holmes. His death in The Final Problem had enraged fans, causing thousands to cancel their subscriptions to The Strand. What is significant about The Hound of Baskervilles is the emphasis not primarily on the detective ability of Sherlock Holmes. In fact, what was more emphasized was the mysterious setting, the atmospheric character of that plays. So the Gothic tone was more important to the story than the fantastic character of the investigator, of the detective Holmes. And of course, as I mentioned, Holmes makes a reappearance after his apparent death in The Final Problem, and it is very, very interesting to see that the reading public showed their protest by cancelling their subscriptions to The Strand when their favorite character was killed off. Although Conan Doyle had previously claimed to have grown weary of Sherlock's name, he subsequently revived the character after negotiating a large payment from publishers. A series of short stories were published in 1903 to 4 and later collected in The Return of Sherlock Holmes. The Hound of Baskervilles was adapted for film numerous times, beginning with a silent German production in 1914. The story of a seemingly supernatural hound that haunts Dartmoor caught the public imagination, pitting as it did the supremely rational Sherlock Holmes against the unearthly family curse that terrorizes the Baskervilles. The novel also merged two popular genres, the detective story and the Gothic tale, using an ingenious double narrative to do so. In addition, along with its late Victorian Gothic predecessors, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and Dracula, the book addressed many of the fears that assailed the final years of the 19th century. The Hound of Baskervilles is a novel which belongs to the turn of the century literary works such as The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and Dracula that addressed the fears and anxieties of the population because of all these new changes in the way they looked at the world. So the turn of the century produced these unique experimental works that really brought to the surface the worries and anxieties of the society. Further, in terms of narrative, we have two modes in this novel. We have the detective mode and we have the Gothic mode, and it's very interesting to see that for the first time Doyle puts Holmes against this unearthly supernatural narrative. We have the present and the past clash, come together, and the past is represented by the family curse, the past is represented by the spectral hound, the past is represented by all these legends about spirits and supernatural creatures, and very interestingly, Stapleton, the villain of the piece, harnesses the power of both the past and the present. He makes use of this legend about the hound, and he also exploits the magic of science. And when he uses phosphorus to make this hound more frightening than it already is. So this merging of two very different traditions and two very different modes and two distinct ideologies is what makes this novel very, very powerful and appealing to the reading public. By the time the first Sherlock Holmes novel, A Study in Scarlet, appeared in 1887, detectives had already begun to appear as central characters in popular fiction. The investigations of Inspector Bucket, for example, had played a large part in the plot of Charles Dickens' novel Bleak House, published in 1853, while Wilkie Collins' The Book, The Moonstone, published in 1868, featured not only the established policeman in the form of Sergeant Cuff, but also introduced a gentleman amateur detective in the character of Franklin Blake. So we know that Holmes comes in the wake of a long line of fictional detectives. If you want to think back to the mid-Victorian period, we have Dickens's own Mr. Bucket, who makes an appearance in Bleak House, and then of course we have our Sergeant Cuff in The Moonstone, in addition to Franklin Blake, who also tries his hand at detective work. So Holmes has his predecessors, and we also realize that all these detectives walk through narratives which are not just about harnessing clues and finding the solution to the problem. We also realize that the fabric of the narrative is Gothic in tone as well. A study in Scarlet, however, took things to a new level, highlighting a modern scientific approach to deduction. Holmes has an excellent knowledge of chemistry. He is able, for example, to distinguish between numerous different types of tobacco ash, and he scientifically appraises crime scenes with a tape measure and a magnifying glass. Deduction from carefully collected clues and close observation was now a key part not only of the detective's work but also of the way in which detective stories were told and presented to the reading public. What is pointed out here is that uh, deduction was a science. It was not just an art but a science, and um, we witness the extraordinary expertise, knowledge, and acumen of Holmes, who was able to distinguish between several different kinds of a particular entity. For example, tobacco ash, and he measures everything, he examines everything very closely using a magnifying glass. All the clues are neatly and very, very methodically explained to the reader. So the narration of deduction is also becoming very, very organized, and this is a spirit of the time. It reflects the scientific inquiry of the time. It reflects the desire to categorize and organize things, and discuss everything in a rational, methodical way. And this detective narrative was part of that spirit of that age. 1 year prior to the appearance of A Study in Scarlet, Robert Louis Stevenson had published his strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which began the fin de siècle renaissance of Gothic literature, providing an imaginative means by which to explore contemporary fears, including the unsettling implications of Darwin's theory of evolution and the growing fears that humankind was becoming both physically weaker and morally more degenerate in an increasingly decadent society. Greg Buswell points out that there was a revival of the Gothic at the turn of the century. There was a renaissance of Gothic literature, Gothic narratives at the turn of the century, and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a novella which is referred time and again to illustrate the immense fear about atavism, about degeneration, about a devolution. If human beings can evolve into a better form, they can also kind of go back, regress in time into something less admirable. So that was a fear that haunted the mind of the public in those times, and one can say that. The Hound of Baskervilles is also a work that participates, that exploits the kind of fear of the public. The Hound of Baskervilles combines both detective and Gothic genres, placing them side by side in an inventive fashion. The rational detective story takes center stage whenever Holmes is present in the narrative. In these sections of the book, a cool logic predominates, and the bizarre events taking place on the moors surrounding Baskerville Hall are subjected to a cool, logical analysis. For much of the story, however, Holmes is absent, or so we are led to believe. So, as we discussed, that we realized that there are twin narratives. One is the detective, the other is the Gothic. Whenever Holmes is present, Boswell suggests that there is the dominance of cool logic. There is ratiocination. There is a logical explanation of things. However, when he is not absent, when he is not present, the implication is that logic takes a back seat, and the Gothic fears and the legends and spectral presences seem to crowd in on the center stage. Yet we also know that Holmes is not far away. He is just not in the center, but he is in the margins conducting his own investigations. Ultimately, the point is that while there is this domain of spectrality, supernatural faith, there is also this domain of science and logic and reason, and we see these two domains come to a head in the Hound of Baskervilles, and we also see how one feeds off the other, as is the case with the with Stapleton, who organizes this crime narrative by combining the forces of science and tradition and legends. Thank you for watching, and continue in the next session.